Imagine walking into the forest behind your home and finding something no one was ever meant to see. A rusted hatch, a forgotten bunker, and inside, documents that could shake an entire nation. This is where Daniel, a former Marine, and Rex, his loyal German shepherd, began a battle they never asked for. But in their darkest moment, something powerful happened. Something that felt like more than instincts, more than luck. Call it fate. Call it courage. Or maybe call it God's hand guiding them through the storm. If you believe in miracles, loyalty, and standing for what's right, even when the world turns against you, this story is for you. Before we begin, please like, comment, and subscribe to help share this message of hope and faith. And may God bless every viewer who joins us on this journey. Early autumn had settled heavily over the small town of Hamilton, Montana, a quiet community resting along the eastern edge of the Bitterroot Mountains, where cold morning winds rolled down from the peaks and carried the damp scent of pine and wet soil. Gray clouds hung low across the sky, threatening early snow even though it was only the first weeks of fall. The forest surrounding the town was dense, filled with towering evergreens and cottonwoods turning golden, their leaves trembling with every gust of wind. The trail Daniel Brooks walked on was slick from last night's rain, the kind that soaked the ground deeply and left dark patches of mud along the hillside. Daniel, a 38-year-old former Marine with a solid frame, a broad chest, and a steady presence, moved with the cautious discipline of someone who had spent years navigating unpredictable terrain. His square jaw, short dark hair, and faint stubble gave him a rugged look, while the calm gray of his eyes suggested a man who measured every situation before acting. Service in the Marines had shaped not only his body, but also the quiet, observant disposition he carried. He rarely spoke unless there was something worth saying. Walking beside him was Rex, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat and powerful posture. Rex's ears flicked at every sound, and his dark eyes scanned the trail with instinctive attention. His personality was a mix of loyalty and sharp discipline, a result of years of search and rescue training during Daniel's military career. Rex had been with Daniel long enough to sense changes in mood, danger, or tension without needing a command. Even though Daniel had retired due to a back injury caused by a blast during his last deployment, Rex remained his steadfast partner. The dog moved silently, padding over the damp earth as the wind rattled branches overhead. They ventured deeper into the forest, where the mountains rose sharply on one side of the trail and a deep ravine dropped away on the other. Daniel paused occasionally to check areas where the soil had shifted, part of the volunteer work he did for the local ranger station after strong storms. He crouched to study a fresh crack running across the path, brushing damp dirt from his gloves as Rex circled around him, sniffing the air in short, sharp breaths. Daniel glanced up at the thickening clouds. The air had a heaviness that warned him more rain, or possibly snow, might be coming. Rex suddenly froze, his body stiffening as his nose lifted toward the wind. Without warning, he veered off the trail, pulling Daniel toward a cluster of dense shrubs growing at the base of a tilted pine tree. Daniel recognized Rex's behavior immediately. This wasn't curiosity. This was detection. He followed, boots sinking into soft mud, until they reached a small clearing that looked oddly disturbed. The ground dipped in a shallow depression, as if something beneath had shifted long ago. Rex began digging, powerful paws sending clumps of dirt flying behind him. Daniel knelt and brushed aside loose soil until his glove hit something hard, a dull metallic surface buried beneath the earth. His heartbeat quickened. Metal this deep in the mountains was unusual. Working carefully, Daniel and Rex cleared the area, revealing a rusted steel hatch. Moss clung to the sides, and the once olive-green paint was almost completely chipped away, exposing darkened metal. A corroded latch sat at its center, stiff and unmoving. Daniel gently pressed his palm to the hatch. The metal was unnaturally cold. He scanned the trees around them, listening. The forest had gone strangely silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Daniel retrieved a pry tool from his backpack and wedged it beneath the latch. With a slow, forceful shove, the hatch creaked open, releasing a burst of stale, frigid air that smelled of dust and forgotten years. He pulled the hatch back fully, revealing a narrow shaft with a worn steel ladder descending into darkness. Turning on his flashlight, Daniel climbed down the ladder, boots landing on a cement floor that had cracked from age. The small chamber was cramped and humid, no larger than a walk-in closet. Metal shelves lined the walls, coated in a thick layer of dust. A metal lockbox sat on the central shelf, marked faintly with U.S. military insignia. Beside it lay an old audio recorder, large, analog with cracked buttons, and a warped plastic folder. Daniel lifted the items and climbed back up to the surface. Rex stepped back instinctively, tail low but steady, watching every movement. The lockbox wasn't locked, only sealed by years of disuse. Inside, Daniel found several yellowed documents. The top paper bore a title typed in faded ink: Project Hawkeye, 1984. The name meant nothing to him, but the style of the document, the formal military formatting, the classification lines, the age, triggered old instincts. He picked up the dusty audio recorder. A taped label on the side read, "Last recording, do not erase." That message, combined with the hidden hatch and the untouched documents, told him one thing: someone had gone to great lengths to bury this. Rex nudged closer, whining softly as if sensing Daniel's unease. Daniel stood in the clearing, cold air swirling around him, and stared at the documents in his hands. This was no ordinary discovery. This was a secret sealed beneath the mountain for decades, and now that he had unearthed it, he felt the weight of something larger, something dangerous, begin to settle over him. Daniel drove back toward the outskirts of Hamilton, with the documents secured tightly in his backpack, the cold Montana wind slicing across the road as evening shadows stretched over the valley. His small cabin sat at the edge of the forest, a modest wooden home with a tin roof that rattled during storms and a narrow porch where he often sat drinking coffee while Rex lay at his feet. As he parked the truck, Rex leapt out first, scanning the tree line with raised ears, already sensing an unfamiliar tension drifting through the air. Daniel unlocked the door and stepped inside, the warm scent of cedar and old books surrounding him. He placed the metal lockbox and the audio recorder on the kitchen table, a hand-carved surface he had built himself as therapy to ease his mind after retiring. Rex settled beside him but stayed unusually alert, occasionally glancing toward the window as if expecting something outside. Daniel opened the yellowed documents and began reading. The first report mentioned covert operations during the final decade of the Cold War. Operations involving unauthorized funds, missing military equipment, and classified movements of personnel. Another document referenced names he didn't recognize, with redacted lines covering almost entire paragraphs. The language was formal, rigid, and carried undertones of wrongdoing. The further he read, the clearer it became. Project Hawkeye wasn't a simple intelligence assignment. It was tied to a cover-up involving high-ranking officials siphoning resources for private gain. His attention shifted to the audio recorder. He replaced the dead batteries with new ones from a drawer and pressed play. A burst of static cracked through the room before a strained male voice emerged, trembling but trying to remain calm. The voice belonged to someone older, likely in his late 50s or early 60s at the time of the recording. Daniel imagined a weathered officer, perhaps tall, lean from years of service with a stern face framed by gray hair and deep wrinkles carved by stress and duty. The man spoke in hurried breaths, identifying himself only as Captain Ellis. His tone held the tension of someone being hunted. He mentioned, "They found out, I'm running out of time, and this must reach someone who can expose them." The recording ended abruptly with a loud bang, either a door being forced open or a gunshot, followed by silence. Daniel sat back slowly, gripping the recorder, feeling the chill of the implication settle deep in his chest. He had stumbled into something engineered to stay buried forever. Whoever these people were, they had silenced Captain Ellis 40 years ago. And now Daniel had the very evidence they failed to destroy. Outside, Rex growled, low, steady, and dangerous. Daniel rose to his feet, moved to the window, and pulled back the curtain just enough to see. A black SUV sat idling near the edge of the road, its engine rumbling quietly. The tinted windows revealed nothing of who was inside. The vehicle didn't belong to anyone in this rural community. It looked government-issued or privately contracted. Daniel's instincts sharpened instantly. He stepped onto the porch with measured steps, keeping his posture calm despite his racing heartbeat. The SUV did not move. No one stepped out. No window lowered. It simply watched. Daniel recognized surveillance behavior. He had done it himself during missions. He scanned the area, but the driver remained invisible. Rex stood beside him, hackles raised, body leaning forward in full protective mode. Daniel placed a hand on his back to steady him. "Easy," he whispered, though his own nerves were tightening. The SUV backed up slowly without turning on its headlights, then disappeared down the dirt road. Daniel remained still for several seconds before exhaling. Whoever was inside knew where he lived. They must have tracked activity in the forest, or perhaps they had access to land use surveillance records. Either way, this was no coincidence. Back inside, Daniel considered calling someone at the ranger station, but dismissed the idea. He couldn't risk dragging innocent people into a storm they didn't understand. Instead, he grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a familiar name. Mark Evans, a retired FBI agent and former teammate from a joint task force operation years ago. Mark was around 45, tall, broad-shouldered, with a square face marked by a faded scar across his left cheek from a drug bust gone wrong. He had sandy blonde hair, usually kept short, and sharp blue eyes that always seemed to evaluate everything in front of him. Mark had a reputation for stubborn honesty and a temper toward corruption due to losing his younger brother to a botched federal investigation years earlier, an incident that shaped his distrust toward high-ranking authority. Daniel hesitated but eventually sent Mark a short text. "I found something. Need your eyes. Urgent." He didn't expect an immediate reply, but Mark answered within minutes with a single sentence. "I'm coming." Daniel set down the phone, ran a hand over his face, and returned to the documents. The room felt colder now, and Rex refused to leave his side. The cabin, usually peaceful and comforting, felt watched. He knew one thing for certain. Whatever was hidden inside Project Hawkeye had already started moving again, and whoever wanted it buried would not stop now that the secret had awakened. Night settled heavily over Hamilton, turning the forest into a maze of shifting silhouettes and muted sounds. Daniel stepped onto his porch with Rex at his side. the cold air brushing against his skin as he scanned the tree line. Ever since the black SUV appeared hours earlier, the woods no longer felt silent. They felt watchful. Rex's posture confirmed it. The dog's tail stayed low, ears pushing forward, nose working the wind with growing intensity. Daniel grabbed his jacket and tactical flashlight before heading toward the trail behind his cabin, determined to check the perimeter before Mark arrived in the morning. As they moved deeper into the dark woods, Rex suddenly halted. His nose pressed to the ground, sniffing rapidly. Daniel knelt beside him and aimed the flashlight downward. Fresh footprints, 3 distinct sets, cut into the soft dirt, spaced in a way that suggested trained movement. These people knew how to travel without noise, but they had underestimated Rex's nose. Daniel stood, pulse tightening. Someone had already been here. They followed the trail, weaving between massive pines until the scent led them to an open clearing. The moonlight revealed broken branches and disturbed soil, signs of a brief stop or observation point. Before Daniel could study the ground further, a sharp rustle broke the stillness. Rex growled, deep and warning. A silhouette stepped from behind a boulder. The man was tall, easily over 6 feet, with a lean, muscular build that came from years of disciplined training. His face was angular, cheekbones sharp, jaw tense beneath a short beard that looked trimmed for practicality, not style. His hair was dark, cut close on the sides, and his eyes, cold and calculating, tracked every movement Daniel made. He wore dark, tactical clothing with no insignia and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had been in dangerous places for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was steady but carried a rough edge, like gravel grinding under pressure. "You shouldn't have opened that hatch," he said. "Walk away and forget what you found." Daniel straightened, keeping his stance neutral but ready. "Not going to happen." The man stepped closer, shoulders tightening as though preparing for a strike. "You don't understand what you're involved in. Hand over the documents." Daniel recognized the tone, the approach, the calculated intimidation. This man was trained, possibly ex-military. That meant whoever he worked for wasn't just a group of criminals. They were well-funded, organized, and used to cleaning up loose ends. Daniel took half a step back, giving Rex space. "If you wanted to talk," Daniel said calmly, "you wouldn't have 3 others hiding in the trees." The man's expression barely shifted, but the slight flicker in his eyes confirmed Daniel's suspicion. And then everything snapped into motion. Rex lunged first, pulling Daniel aside just as a second man charged from the right. Daniel pivoted, grabbing the attacker's arm and using his momentum to slam him into the ground. The first man rushed forward, swinging, but Daniel blocked the strike and countered with a sharp elbow to the ribcage. The man grunted but didn't fall, absorbing the blow like someone trained to take pain without hesitation. Another attacker emerged behind Daniel, smaller than the others but quick, with a wiry frame and sharp features. His expression was tense, almost frightened, as though he hadn't fully accepted the line of work he'd stepped into. His short blonde hair and pale skin made him stand out even in the shadows, and his jittery movements suggested inexperience compared to the others. Daniel grabbed him by the jacket, pulling him forward before sweeping his leg and sending him crashing into the dirt. Rex kept the second attacker pinned, teeth bared but controlled, waiting for Daniel's command. The leader attempted another strike, but Daniel blocked, twisted his arm, and shoved him hard enough to send him stumbling back. For several tense seconds, the clearing remained still except for the sound of heavy breathing. Then the leader raised a hand in signal. "We're done for now," he said, voice steady despite the fight. "But this isn't over." The remaining 2 men crawled back to their feet, and the 3 retreated like ghosts, melting into the trees without another word. Their steps were light, practiced, proof these were hired professionals, not amateurs. Daniel exhaled slowly and sank to one knee, steadying his breath. Rex pressed close, nudging Daniel's shoulder as if checking for injuries. "I'm fine," Daniel murmured, resting a hand on the dog's neck. "Good work." As they made their way back to the cabin, Daniel's mind raced. These weren't random trespassers. They were part of something larger, something connected to the documents. If they were willing to attack him tonight, they would be back, and they would come harder. Reaching the cabin, Daniel locked the door and grabbed his phone. Mark needed to know everything. He typed quickly. "They came. 3 men, tactical gear. They want the documents. Hurry." Seconds later, Mark responded, "On my way. Stay inside and secure everything." Daniel put down the phone and looked at Rex, who watched him with steady determination. The weight of the situation deepened. The men from the forest had discipline, resources, and orders. Orders to retrieve the documents at any cost. Daniel had no doubt now. This fight was bigger than him. Fog rolled over Hamilton before sunrise, thick and pale like drifting smoke, curling through the trees and swallowing the shapes of houses along the valley. Daniel stood inside his cabin with Rex at his feet, listening to the low hum of Mark's SUV approaching. When Mark Evans stepped inside, he carried the same commanding presence he always had, tall and broad-shouldered, scar across his left cheek slightly visible beneath the dim kitchen light. His sandy blonde hair was damp from the fog, and his sharp blue eyes scanned the room with a mix of caution and focus. Mark had always been the type who distrusted stillness. His years in the FBI had taught him that trouble often came in silence. Daniel laid out the documents and audio recorder on the table. Mark leaned in, adjusting his glasses, a thin-framed pair he only used when reading, something he disliked admitting because it made him feel older. He combed through each page, flipping between reports, files, and handwritten notes. The deeper he read, the tighter his jaw became. "This isn't just corruption," Mark said, voice low and steady. "These are cover-ups involving defense budgets, missing equipment, falsified casualties. Daniel, these files could reopen federal cases that were buried for 40 years. Daniel nodded. Captain Ellis must have tried to expose it. They silenced him. Mark exhaled heavily, fingers tapping the table. "And now they want to silence you." Before Daniel could respond, Rex growled sharply, one loud, commanding sound that froze both men in place. Rex's ears shot forward, and he moved toward the window, posture rigid. Daniel peeked through the curtain and saw dark silhouettes shifting among the fog-soaked trees. The shapes were faint but unmistakable. Multiple men approaching, moving in disciplined formation. "They found us," Daniel whispered. Mark didn't hesitate. He reached into his coat and pulled out a compact handgun, his personal weapon, matte black, well-maintained. "We need to move. Now." Daniel grabbed his backpack with the documents, slinging it over his shoulder. Rex stayed close, sensing the rising tension. Just as they stepped toward the back door, a gunshot cracked through the fog, punching a splintering hole through the cabin wall. Rex barked violently. Mark shoved Daniel to the floor. "Sniper!" he shouted. Daniel crawled toward the opposite wall, heart racing. "Rex, find!" he commanded. The German shepherd bolted out the back door, nose to the ground, senses hyper-focused. Daniel and Mark followed, keeping low as they dashed into the dense forest behind the cabin. Fog wrapped around them, reducing visibility to mere feet. Branches snapped behind them, more men in pursuit. Mark took the lead, guiding them through the trees with the confidence of someone who had chased criminals through worse conditions. Rex suddenly veered left, growling deep and sharp. Daniel understood instantly. Rex had found the sniper's trail. They followed the dog up a narrow incline where the fog thinned slightly. As they reached a rocky ridge, Rex crouched low, staring toward a faint silhouette kneeling behind a fallen log. The sniper was a tall, slim man dressed in dark, tactical gear, his long black rifle resting on a bipod. His face was narrow, with a long jawline and deep-set brown eyes marked by a cold stillness. He had short brown hair, neatly trimmed, and a thin scar running along his eyebrow, signs of past conflicts. His calm posture revealed he was highly trained, likely ex-military or a contracted marksman. He didn't notice Rex approaching from the flank. Just as the sniper adjusted his aim to fire again, Rex lunged with a ferocious bark. The man jerked in surprise, firing a shot that missed Daniel by inches before Daniel slammed into him, knocking the rifle away. Mark pinned the sniper's arm with one knee while Daniel disarmed him fully. Rex held position, teeth bared, ready to strike if the man made a wrong move. The sniper stared up at them with a mixture of shock and frustration. He didn't speak. He didn't resist. His silence carried the weight of someone who'd been instructed not to reveal anything, even at the cost of his life. "We need to go," Mark urged. "More are coming." Daniel grabbed Rex by the collar, and they sprinted deeper into the forest. The fog thickened again, swallowing the world around them. Behind them came distant shouts, organized, angry, desperate. They didn't stop until they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Daniel's chest heaved with exhaustion, but his mind burned with clarity. "If they're willing to kill to hide this," he said, "then exposing it is the only way to end this." Mark nodded firmly. "Then we expose everything. But we need a plan, and we need a safe place to do it." Daniel tightened his grip on the backpack. Rex pressed against his leg, steady and unwavering. The truth had been hidden for decades. Now it had finally surfaced, and they would not let it be buried again. The fog had thinned by mid-morning, leaving the Bitterroot forest draped in a soft, gray light. Daniel, Mark, and Rex moved quietly through the trees, breaths visible in the cold air. Last night's attack had changed everything. They were no longer running blindly. Now they had a plan. Daniel carried coils of wire, camouflage netting, and small improvised trip alarms he had assembled from old marine gear he kept in storage. Mark moved beside him with the steady discipline of someone who had spent years coordinating field operations. His scarred cheek and hardened eyes seemed even sharper this morning, sharpened by urgency and a sense of justice long stifled. Rex trotted ahead, occasionally doubling back, tail tense and nose close to the ground. They chose a section of forest where narrow paths converged, a natural choke point. Daniel worked methodically, setting traps designed not to kill, but to expose. He secured tripwires along key access points, all leading to noisemakers or flashes that would reveal positions. Mark hid motion detection sensors, small devices he had salvaged from his old field kits. "These guys won't expect a defensive grid like this," he murmured. "They're used to taking people by surprise, not walking into it." Daniel nodded without speaking. His focus narrowed to the forest, the silent trees, and the weight of the documents in his backpack. Every movement he made was deliberate, a muscle memory he had thought he left behind with his uniform. Rex stopped suddenly, sniffing intensely. Then he growled, a deep warning rumble. Daniel froze. "They're coming," he said quietly. Moments later, the first tripwire snapped. A metallic clatter echoed through the forest as one of the noise traps triggered. The enemy was here. 3 figures emerged through the trees. The leader, whom Daniel recognized from the night before, moved with the same cold precision, jaw clenched, dark beard framing a face shaped by hardship. His eyes were hard, calculating, and entirely focused. Behind him followed 2 others, one tall and sturdily built, with close-cropped blonde hair and a square face that looked more bruiser than tactician, and another with longish, dark hair, pale skin, and an anxious expression that showed he wasn't as seasoned as the others. All 3 wore tactical vests and carried rifles fitted with silencers. The first trap went off. An overhead branch snapped, dropping a net of dry leaves and debris that momentarily obscured their vision. The second trap triggered just moments later. A burst of sharp metallic clicking that echoed like gunfire. The blonde attacker flinched, ducking instinctively. The leader snarled, "Spread out! They're close!" Daniel and Mark took cover behind a fallen tree. Mark steadied his breathing, his blue eyes focused through the fog. "They're uncertain. That's our advantage," he whispered. Rex lunged forward in a blur, chasing the weaker-looking attacker. Daniel called after him, "Flank right, Rex!" The German Shepherd obeyed immediately, circling around behind the enemy, while Mark fired 2 warning shots that forced them into the open. A chaotic struggle erupted. The leader charged Daniel, swinging the butt of his rifle like a club. Daniel blocked with his forearm, pain surging up his arm, then countered with a swift elbow strike that caught the man in the jaw. The blonde attacker tackled Mark, who met him with surprising force, his past training coming back with brutal efficiency. He delivered 2 solid punches, forcing the man to the ground. Meanwhile, Rex barreled into the anxious attacker, knocking him off balance. The man fired blindly, a bullet grazing Daniel's sleeve. "Rex, pull back!" Daniel ordered. The dog retreated just as the man tripped a hidden wire. A loud flash detonated, startling him long enough for Rex to pin him again, this time without risk. The leader recovered and aimed his rifle at Daniel, but Rex reacted faster. With a fierce bark, he lunged and grabbed Daniel's jacket, yanking him sideways just as a suppressed shot hissed past where Daniel's head had been. Daniel rolled, grabbed a fallen branch, and struck the leader's weapon hand with all his strength. The rifle clattered to the dirt. Mark moved in from behind, tackling the man and pinning him to the ground. Within minutes, the forest fell silent. The attackers were subdued, breathing heavily but no longer fighting. Daniel tied their hands with heavy-duty cord, while Rex stood guard, chest rising and falling with deep, controlled breaths. Mark caught his breath. "You realize," he said, wiping blood from his lip, "that this isn't just self-defense anymore. These men, they're part of something huge." Daniel looked down at the backpack that held the documents, "Which is exactly why we're ending it today." By noon, Daniel and Mark had contacted a trusted journalist from a major national network, a woman named Linda Hayes, known for her dedication to exposing government corruption. Linda was in her early 40s, medium height with dark, wavy shoulder-length hair and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. Her calm confidence and assertive tone earned her both respect and enemies. She arrived with a federal liaison and a secure evidence team. Hours later, the story broke nationwide. Project Hawkeye, corruption, cover-ups, missing funds, a murdered whistleblower. Congress demanded hearings. Cases long buried cracked open. Arrests began within days, and when reporters tried to identify the man who discovered the truth, Daniel simply stepped away, choosing silence over fame. He and Rex returned to their quiet cabin, where the forest finally felt calm again. They never claimed to be heroes, but the country would never forget what they had uncovered. Sometimes the greatest miracles in life are not thunderous moments or flashes of light from the sky, but quiet nudges that guide us toward the truth, protect us in danger, and remind us that we are never walking alone. What Daniel, Rex, and Mark faced was far greater than any one person could handle. But strength appeared exactly when they needed it most. Some call it luck, but many of us know it as God's gentle hand, moving in the silence, leading His children through the darkest woods. Just like the hidden truth they uncovered, each of us carries battles the world doesn't see. Each day brings challenges that can shake our faith or weigh on our hearts. Yet there's always a light, subtle, steady, ready to guide us forward. Sometimes it's the kindness of a friend. Sometimes it's the loyalty of an animal. Sometimes it's courage we didn't know we still had. And sometimes it's simply God reminding us that He still watches, still listens, and still protects. If this story touched your heart today, I invite you to share it with someone who may need a reminder that miracles still happen, even in the quiet corners of everyday life. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Let your voice be part of this community. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story of courage, faith, and hope. May God bless you, protect your family, and surround your days with peace. Thank you for watching, and may His grace walk beside you wherever you go.